Dr. Cinema. This is my attempt at showing I guess, shout out to one of my favorite movie reviewers, the Cinema Snob. Anyway, this is my 300th video. It just goes to show that if you have no editing skills, no budget, and no standards, you can do anything. So, when I did my 100th and 200th videos, they were Friday the 13th films, because both of those videos fell on Friday the 13th. Not the case for this one. It's Godzilla Month, and since we've already talked about the original film, the 1998 awful American film, talk about the 2014 good film, Godzilla. And the front cover says, an epic showdown, which I agree with. And on the back it says, this is the Godzilla fans have been waiting for. And by that, they mean American audiences have been waiting for an American studio to make a good Godzilla film. Legendary Pictures gained the rights to make a Godzilla film back in 2009 and released this in 2014 with Gareth Edwards as the director. So, let's begin, shall we? So with the opening credits, we got a little brief montage of Japanese government and then at that time new organization called Monarch trying to take down Godzilla with nuclear bombs. After the opening credits are finished, we jump from 1954 to 1999, where a helicopter takes two Monarch members, played by Ken Watanabe and Sally Hawkins, and yes, I'm only going to refer to them by Ken and Sally. There is apparently a cavern that opened up into an underground cave, where we see a giant skeleton of, I'm guessing, a former Godzilla, maybe a very similar species. And attached to it are two spores, one's dormant, the other, hatch, and whatever was in it, crawled out of a separate tunnel and went somewhere. In that same time, we jump to Japan, where we see a family of three, and the dad and father is played by Bryan Cranston, and he's an engineer at the nuclear power plant. And you're goddamn right I'm calling him Bryan Cranston throughout this entire film. So, he and his wife go to the power plant where they both work, and Bryan Cranston has been studying and been worried about these tremors that has been picking up on sensors and such. And then suddenly, the nuclear reactor has a breach, and all this dangerous gas starts spilling out. And at the time, Bryan Cranston's wife and a team were going to go down and check it out, but then they try to start running back, trying to get away before the gas kills them. But before they could make it, Bryan Cranston had no choice but to seal off that area, but containing the gas in that part of the plant. And through a little window, we see a very touching moment between Bryan Cranston and the woman that plays his wife. And it's actually a very good moment with very little dialogue. And that just goes to show how much I love Bryan Cranston as an actor. He's great. But then Bryan Cranston and other people start leaving the power plant, and the entire thing is collapsing. And that pretty much turns the entire area in that city of Japan into a quarantine zone, uninhabitable. Then we jump 15 liters to 2014, where Bryan Cranston's son, named Ford, is in the US Navy as an explosive specialist. There isn't a more official term, but that's just what I'm going with. And he goes back to home in San Francisco to meet up with his young son Sam, and his wife Elle, played by Elizabeth Olsen, a good actress, but this movie reminds me why I think she's hot, because she is. That night, as he's reuniting with his son and wife, gets a call from Japan saying his father has been arrested for trying to trespass into the quarantine zone again. Turns out throughout the years, Bryan Cranston has been trying to figure out why exactly the power plant went down, what caused it, keeping track of all of these newspaper articles, believing there's some sort of cover-up. So, Ford goes to Japan to pick up his dad from the police station, and we get a goth kid. It's brief, but before Bryan Cranston is released, they release this young teenage Japanese kid, and he's in full-blown goth attire. Don't know why this is worth mentioning, but I have never seen a young Japanese kid in full-blown American-style goth attire. I mean, I guess goth culture is pretty universal, but it's just really weird to see it that's not happening to, like, a white kid. That might be... I don't know if that makes me a racist. I like to think not to, but I appreciate it. Keep me open to the world's possibilities. Anyway, after Ford brings his dad back to his current living place in Japan, get into a little argument. Ford saying that you can't obsess over the past, so you have to move on. And that Bryan Cranston tells his son that he can't just run away from the past, he has to deal with it. Both rather valid arguments, and Ford is convinced to help his dad get into the quarantine zone to retrieve some data that he left behind in their old home 15 years ago that could help him figure out what exactly is going on. Now, in the quarantine zone, it turns out there's no radiation. Yeah, they're in full-blown, like, radiation suits, but there's no radiation, so fuck it. Get to the house, he retrieves his data, but then they get picked up by some mysterious authority figures and takes them to a separate facility, where we also once again meet up with Ken and Sally's characters of the Monarch organization. And in this facility, there's this big chrysalis form that's housing something that's been every now and then emitting electromagnetic pulses that temporarily shuts down all electronic stuff for a few seconds, and it's been getting worse and worse throughout the years. And it has been feeding off of the nuclear energy from the power plant, which explains why there's no radiation. Ken and Sally start going through like the material that Bryan Cranston discovered back in his home, thinking this kind of information has been missing for years. And then the chrysalis hatches, and we get a giant monster named... It actually doesn't get a name. It's classified as Massive Unidentified Terrestrial Organism, or Muto. Okay, it's still a cool creature though. And during its escape from the facility, where it can fly... Mothra Easter egg? No Mothra Easter egg. During his escape, Bryan Cranston gets injured, severely injured. And so when some US Navy people show up to help get Ken and Sally, they also bring along Ford and his very injured father, who dies during the transport to the US Navy ship that they're going to all meet on. Alright, let me just check. Yep. And so after having a brief moment with his dead dad, Ford meets up with Sally, Ken, and a US Navy admiral, and exposition time. Yeah, during this little presentation of sorts, Ken explains that Monarch has existed since the 1950s, where back in 1954, when Godzilla first appeared, they tried to take it down, and all the nuclear testing that was happening during the time was actually trying to kill Godzilla. However, since they all failed, Monarch was then made to just study and keep track of Godzilla and other similar giant monsters. And during this time, Ford also brings up that while during the brief time between picking his dad up from the police station and going to the quarantine zone, he discovered that his dad was discovering the possibility that the noises that have been coming from the chrysalis and the Muto have been some form of echolocation. Which brings up the possibility that there's another Muto out there that it's trying to communicate with. And after all that, he gets dropped off in Honolulu. Why? I mean, he is a U.S. Navy man. He could help with trying to find a way to track the Muto and try to help find a way to take it down. Why just drop him off in Honolulu? It's not even close to his home. But he does get on a train and try to go to the airport to get back to San Francisco. During the night in the Honolulu wilderness, they send in ground units with machine guns to try to find the Muto. Are you fucking kidding me? Moving on. Apparently, the Muto discovered a nuclear submarine, dropped off in this little part of the island, and starts eating on the nuclear energy. They do bring in some airplanes to help try and take it down, but again, the Muto lets out an EMP pulse, and the airplanes go down. So it's just a bunch of ground units out, using machine guns and some tanks. Not going so well. But slowly, at 55 minutes in to this 2-hour film, we see the spikes of Godzilla poke through the ocean, and we see the tail as Godzilla is swimming to Honolulu. He goes underneath the Navy ships and starts going towards shore, causing a whole bunch of water to rush inland and starts flooding the streets of Honolulu. And as people are running away, trying to get away from the water, there's this one dad that's carrying this girl, and the girl just has the most blank face during a catastrophe like this. She's just like, huh, look at that. Show emotion, girl. Anyway, all the people that can escape get to the top of buildings, and we see this Muto come across this train, starts trying to see if it can eat it and such, gives up on it, and Ford survives that. But then, at 59 minutes in, we start at the bottom. The camera moves slowly upwards. We see the torso, and we see Godzilla's face. He lets out that mighty roar, and then immediately cuts to Sam watching TV back in San Francisco. And during that cut to Sam and Elle in San Francisco, we get a news report that shows clips of a fight between the Muto and Godzilla, and the two monsters departing to move on to the next location. Gareth Edwards did say that his influence came from films like Jaws or Third Accountants of the Third Kind, where the whole purpose of the movies was to build anticipation and suspense, and not just throwing things at the screen. Which I can appreciate. It is an interesting take on a Godzilla film, but it can be slightly frustrating at a couple of points. Nothing real significant, but it is kind of funny at certain points, like how less it shows you in a particular point. Anyway, where was I? Yes. So as Ford tries to fly to California, we get a bird's eye view of just these Navy ships surrounding Godzilla as they're all traveling to San Francisco. Now, I know that the Navy and the Army are just trying to find a way to take out all the monsters involved, but it really looks like they're just escorting Godzilla, and they're just really backup, which is kind of badass in a way. So during this trip to San Francisco, they discovered that the echo location that the Muto has been sending out is actually not to get Godzilla's attention, but to get attention from a different Muto. You remember that spore from the skeleton back in 1999 that was dormant? Well, they gave it to the American counterparts in Nevada, right outside of Las Vegas, and when they called their American counterparts, it hatched, and the female Muto is on the move. That's right. A flying Muto and a land-based Muto are wreaking havoc, going towards San Francisco to mate. Honestly, it's not the most craziest plot in any Godzilla movie. It's actually probably one of the more serious ones, so sure. And as the female Muto moves, it does what probably a lot of people would like to do to Las Vegas. Tear that shit to the ground. The buildings, the casinos, the poser Eiffel Tower, all down. I actually don't know if anyone does want Las Vegas to be torn down, but at this point, it's become such a cliche and tacky city that I think we can live without it. So, so the Navy and the Army come up with the idea to use nuclear warheads as a way to lure all the monsters together and to take them all out. Ken brings up the point of they tried this back in 1954, it didn't work. But the Army also brings up the point that the bombs they have today are a lot more powerful than back in the 50s. Which is a good point, but you're dealing with three giant monsters. Chances are, even the bombs are going to work, you're probably going to need to use a lot more than what you're actually using in the movie. But I get it, safety of the people, of course. So, Ford actually ends up in Lone Pine, California for some reason, but then he teams up with some Army people that are transferring the warheads that are going to use as bait, and sort of joins their teams as sort of the explosive expert, trying to make sure that everything is going to go alright with the bombs and such. And let's see here. Yes. So, Ford finds a way to call his wife, who is a nurse working at the hospital in San Francisco, where she also has their son. They say the usual husband-wife stuff, and he does not tell her to get out of the city with her son, for some reason. I mean, I get it, the streets are going to be jam-packed as hell, and as a nurse, she probably feels like a moral obligation to help people stuck in the city, but still try and tell her to get out of the city. I don't know why, it just feels like a good idea to tell your wife and son to get out of danger, even if they don't actually end up doing it. Still tell them the option. And during this little call to the hospital, there's a news report that says America under attack. Giant monsters are emerging from the world. People are realizing giant monsters exist, and all the American media is concerned about is that how they're all going to attack America. It's kind of funny, but considering some of the stuff America has done, it's probably not a surprise that they would go after America. I mean, even Ken, during even in Oakland, when the Admiral, the two, Ken and Sally, Monarch people, and the rest of the Army meet up and set up a station, Ken says that he believes that Godzilla is here to actually bring balance to what is happening. And of course, some people think that's just ridiculous. You're going to try to take out all these monsters at once, which is fair. So we cut to a school bus on the Golden Gate Bridge, which is again jam-packed. The reason we do this is because Elle put her son Sam on this bus with one of her work friends that's carrying a bunch of kids to safety away from what's going to happen in San Francisco, which I get. And then we see Godzilla spikes out of the water, swimming towards these Navy ships, goes under the ships, pops up behind the ships, which is nice, but then walks right through the Golden Gate Bridge. Come on, Godzilla, be nice. I mean, why can't you swim under the bridge? This way, you don't have to walk through the bridge and a whole bunch of cars don't have to rush across like madmen, like the school bus driver carrying all the kids, to get to safety. Come on. Some brief interaction between, Navy people attacking Godzilla, even though it looks like he's trying to be the good guy here, and dives back into the water. Oh, I should mention earlier that as, Ford and the Army people are transferring the warheads, the female Muto ate most of them, but they were still able to salvage one and carry it by plane towards San Francisco. But then the male Muto grabs the warhead. As it's grabbing it, it dives bomb into the bay, pops up, and then meets with his female partner in Chinatown district. And it's actually kind of a cute moment. First of all, I kind of like the designs of these two unnamed Mutos. I mean, the female smaller than Godzilla, but still pretty big. And it's obviously pregnant because of like all the eggs you can see inside her womb. And the male Muto is actually smaller than the female Muto, but it has the advantage of flying, which is kind of a neat idea, having the male fly and the female be more ground-based. And they do have a cute moment, rub heads with each other. It's actually kind of nice. Male Muto gives the female the warhead. She starts making a nest, and looks like Big Trouble in Little China just became Monster Trouble in Little China. Yeah, I know, Quachi, I'm sorry. Anyway. So, as the army tries to figure out what to do now, the Admiral asks Ken if he actually thinks Godzilla can take them on. And Ken says some stuff about how the arrogance of man is thinking nature is in our control when it's supposed to be the other way around, and says, let them fight. I think Ken Watanabe is just here to stare dramatically and say badass lines. Not complaining. Alright, so Ford and his army buddies get the task of trying to retrieve the warhead from the nest and try to deactivate it. If they can't, put it on a boat where they'll then drive it far enough away for when it explodes and won't harm anyone. Sounds good enough. So they skydive into the city, and as they skydive down, they are so goddamn close to Godzilla that the only reason he doesn't notice them is because he's fighting off two Mutos at once. They all miraculously land safely, and they go into the nest. They got the warhead, which is surrounded by all these eggs, but they can't deactivate it, so they decide to move it to the boat. One of the guys stays behind and sets all the eggs on fire, and it explodes. And Ford is sort of cut off from the rest of the group when this explosion happens. And the explosion happens at a good time because the two Mutos are tag teaming Godzilla, and it distracts the female Muto at least. And she goes check on the eggs, and then she sees Ford. I swear to God, even though Ford is like the size of a cockroach to this Muto, she has the most hateful look in her eyes. Like, it's all directed at this guy. Then Godzilla comes up and starts fighting the Mutos again. And then as his male Muto is trying to fly in and attack Godzilla, Godzilla uses Tail Whip. Critical hit. But then, still fighting, he sort of falls down in exhaustion, and both Ford and Godzilla share this kind of look. Like, I don't know, like a look of camaraderie? Kind of weird, but I'll go with it. So the warhead gets to the boat, and Ford gets on the boat and leaves off with the boat, as he's the only one left on the boat with the warhead. Female Muto catches up. Again, hateful look. Ford picks up his handgun, ready to fire, even though it won't do anything. Godzilla comes. Oh, I should mention earlier, a little bit earlier before this scene, he finally uses his atomic breath against the male Muto. But on this one, he really uses it. Grabs the female Muto, opens her mouth, atomic breaths into her body, decapitates her head. Fatality, bitch. Godzilla went back onto land, falls down in exhaustion. Ford gets rescued by some airborne military people. And it's the next day. And he's still collapsed on the ground from exhaustion, unconscious, as people are trying to find other people and rescue them from the damaged area. Elle, Sam, and Ford meet up. We see a little, and we cut back to Godzilla. Surprise! He ain't dead. Which reminds me of the point. Why does Godzilla care? these two Mutos are just trying to mate. And back in 1954, Monarch tried to kill him, and the army still tried to kill him in this one. Maybe the skeleton from the Philippines was like a brother, sister, cousin, uncle, and he's out exacting revenge. But since he's going to be back as a hero in the next film, I'm just going to go with he is a relatively competent giant monster hero, sure. And then we get this like big news bulletin that says, King of the Monsters, Savior of our city. Oh sure, when Superman is played by Henry Cavill saves Metropolis from General Zod, everyone criticizes how he should have done more. But when Godzilla saves the city, they call him a hero and a savior. Godzilla walks to the shore, lets out his giant roar, dives back into the ocean, and end credits. And that's the 2014 film Godzilla. It's a pretty good movie. Not flawless, but pretty damn good. So, this movie came out in 2014, directed by Gareth Edwards, who would later go on in 2016 to direct Rogue One. Elizabeth Olsen, 1 year later, joined the MCU as Scarlet Witch, aka Wanda Maximoff. Bryan Cranston is still Bryan Cranston. Sally Hawkins went on to The Shape of Water and Fuck the Fish Man. She's going to be back in King of the Monsters. As well as Ken Watanabe, who I swear is only going to be in movies made by American studios based on Japanese properties. Because in addition to King of Monsters, he's also going to appear in the Detective Pikachu movie. What the fuck? And this movie was pretty successful. In addition to gaining a lot of positive critical response, it made a total of $529 million against a $160 million budget, giving Legendary Pictures the official go-ahead to make sequels and effectively create a sort of cinematic universe that includes Kong Skull Island, the upcoming Godzilla 2, King of the Monsters, and in 2020 we'll get Godzilla vs. Kong. And this is still a pretty good movie. It's leagues above the 1998 film, though not better than the original 1954 film. But I have seen a lot of fan lists that put this consistently somewhere in the top 10. And I probably would too, but I still need to watch more Godzilla films before I can make a accurate top 10 list. But that is my 300th video. Watching, I want to thank you guys for being subscribers and viewing our videos, the few of you who do. Someday in the future, hopefully I'll get a budget and editing skills and standards. But that's our 300th video. We're going to continue with Godzilla Month throughout to the end of January. But we want to thank you for your time and your views and such. So, that's all we have to say right now. Subscribe, like, comment down below, share this video, and Dr. Cinema and Quachi, and we will see you guys next time.